Wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today in our next webinar in our marketing and advertising series. So today we're going to talk about sustainability with substance, so environmental claims. We all know how huge the political and consumer agenda is at the moment, pushing companies to be more environmentally friendly, and rightly so. And I think a lot of companies are really trying to make good changes, and they know that they need to do that, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because honestly, it's what consumers expect and it is going to hit the bottom line. We talk a lot about greenwashing, and I intentionally didn't want to call this webinar a webinar on greenwashing because I think it's got such negative connotations. And I think so many companies at the moment really are trying to do their best to become more environmentally friendly, and rightly they really want to shout about it, but the regulatory authorities, so the ASA and the CMA, are really hot on this at the moment. As I'm sure many of you know, it's a really hot topic, and even companies that are trying their hardest to get it right are getting it wrong. So that's why it's really important for us to run through today what the rules are in the UK, so that everyone can try to get it right. So on the next slide, I've just got a little intro to our marketing and advertising team. We do a lot of different types of marketing and advertising work, which I won't go into here, but our contact details are here so that if you would like to get in touch with us at any point, you can do. So next, what will we cover today? I'm going to talk a bit about sustainability in the press, what we've been seeing instances of, where it's gone right, where it's gone wrong, more so where it's gone wrong, the rules in the UK, what you can do, what you can't do, where's the grey area. I really want to talk about a brand that I think has got it right, because I think it's really nice in all the doom and gloom stories to share a bit about what people are doing that's right, and give you some golden rules to try and live by when you're doing these kind of claims, and also to talk about some common pitfalls to avoid. Jane's going to talk about the slightly technical subject of certification marks, which is something I suspect many people haven't given a great deal of thought to, but I think when Jane starts talking, you'll think, oh yes, actually, I do know quite a lot about these, but it's really helpful to have an awareness of them and how they work and how they're different to trademarks. And finally, we're going to talk about a few practical considerations. As Tom said at the start, if you've got any questions, please pop them in a Q&A. Jane and I will answer them at the end. So let's start with sustainability in the press. My first clip here is of Boohoo and Kourtney Kardashian. I mean, this story got so much backlash in the press for all the right reasons. You've got a company like Boohoo, which is, you know, not really renowned for sustainability, being a fast fashion company. And you've got an influencer like Kourtney Kardashian, again, not renowned for sustainability, although she does talk about it quite a lot. What we see in practice is her flying around the world in a private jet. So you've got two companies, two of these people partnering up, and, you know, rightly so, consumers have said, you can throw all the money you like at this, but that partnership does not equal sustainability. And, you know, this came weeks after the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, so the CMA, announced that Boohoo, along with ASOS and Asda, were under investigation over greenwashing. So I think the cautionary tale is here. It's not just a headline. You really got to live the sustainability journey. And if it is just a headline, consumers will pick up on it immediately. But having said that, going on to some other companies who I think often are really trying to do the right thing. So we've got Innocent, who I personally would have perceived as a company that were quite green and that were trying to do the right thing. And I think that they were, but they had an advert recently in which characters sung about messing up the planet, and then they sung about fixing up the planet. And Plastic Rebellion complained, saying that the advert exaggerated the environmental benefits of Innocent products and was therefore misleading. And the ASA said that the advert drew strong links between Innocent drinks and a positive environmental impact. However, because the product is made of plastic and it's actually a non-recycled material, and its extraction and processing process had a negative environmental impact, overall the advert was misleading. So that's pretty clear. You go on and look at the scooters. Those are scooters made by a company called Tier. Tier provide electric scooters in London, and they had an advert that said, "Be environmentally friendly, take a Tier." So I, as a consumer, if I'm looking at that, think, well, sure, taking a scooter is going to be more environmentally friendly, say, than maybe taking a taxi or driving. However, it's a very big claim, and the ASA said that saying "be environmentally friendly, take a Tier" implies that electric scooters cause no environmental damage whatsoever. Because although they're no emissions, obviously the electricity's got to come from somewhere, and you've got the manufacturing the scooters, etc. The ASA said that it wasn't a relative claim because it wasn't clear in the advert that the scooters were being compared to, say, a car. In fact, the ASA said it was actually an absolute claim, and therefore, because there was no information to suggest otherwise, the claim was that scooters were environmentally friendly per se, and therefore it was misleading. So I'll talk a bit later on in the webinar about the difference between absolute claims and relative claims, but I think this is a really good example of where the claim itself wasn't clear. Then we've got the Tesco ad. So this is it's a lady in the advert. You can see her. She's biting into a veggie burger. And on the ad itself, it said "better for the planet." And again, the ASA said the claim had not been substantiated. And the reason being that although it is generally accepted that vegetarian and vegan foods are less environmentally damaging than eating meat, in this specific instance, the Tesco could not substantiate the claim they were making. So they couldn't say that that particular product was less damaging to the environment than a meat-based burger would be. So I think the thing to take away from this one is, yes, we all accept that certain products are less environmentally damaging, but you cannot take the general assumption and apply it to your particular product. You still need to be able to substantiate your own claims. And then we've got the Oatly drink, and it's a similar point, really. We all accept that oat drinks, generally speaking, are going to be less environmentally damaging than cow's milk. However, Oatly had made a lot of claims, and they were very specific claims, and I won't go into them here because there were lots of them. But actually, they had seemingly made them across their range of products when in fact they could only substantiate them in relation to one of their products. So the ASA said that they were misleading. So just a few examples of companies that haven't got it right and that it has hit the press and it has made quite a splash. So I'm going to hand over now to Jane, who's going to talk about what the rules are in the UK and what you can do.
Hello, and thank you for listening. I'm going to talk about the rules in the UK, specifically the Green Claims Code, which was published September 2021 to help businesses comply with the law on consumer protection from unfair trading. The CMA is concerned about people being misled by environmental claims and wants to ensure that businesses feel confident navigating the law in this area. The CMA have stated that they would carry out a full review of misleading green claims off and online throughout the course of this year, and they stand ready to take action against offending firms. Moving on to the next slide. The CMA have set out 6 principles to follow when making environmental claims, and if you stick to these, you won't go far wrong. The claims code has been written for all businesses, and business to consumers and business to business are both relevant. In addition to following the guidance in the claims, you must also comply with any sector or product specific laws that are applicable to your specific industry. I'm going to talk now about the 6 principles, and what underpins these principles is that you have to be able to live up to the claim that you're making and that it must not be misleading. The first principle is claims must be truthful and accurate. So you've got to live up to the claims being made. They can't be misleading, and they should be clear, precise and concise. The second principle is that claims must be clear and unambiguous. Broader, vague claims are more likely to be misleading without an explanation and they're more difficult to substantiate. Think about and consider the overall impression of the product or packaging and use of any logos. What impression are they giving off? Claims related to an objective accredited certification are much more likely to be acceptable. And I saw a really good example of this recently. It was a really simple, clear and unambiguous claim. And basically it said, all our coffee is UTZ certified coffee. Simple message, objective accredited certification. Great example of getting it right, I thought. Something else to consider is future environmental goals. So, for example, claims such as we're committed to reduce our carbon footprint, they're all very well and good, but say how or when this is going to happen. So it would be better to say something like, we have reduced our carbon footprint by whatever % since last year. So I think the takeaway point is to be specific. General all-encompassing sustainability claims don't provide any real indication of what is meant and basically live up to the overall impression that you're creating. The third principle is that claims must not omit or hide important relevant information. So give the full picture so the consumers can make an informed choice. Don't cherry pick information to appear to be better or say one thing but not another, or hide misleading information. The fourth principle is that comparisons must be fair and meaningful. They should be based on clear, current, objective information. The comparison should be like for like, and the basis for any comparison should be made clear. The fifth principle is that claims must consider the full life cycle of the product or service from creation to disposal. So think here about manufacture, transport, use, performance, disposal, any waste consequences, and does the product have an overall impact on the environment? The final principle is that claims must be substantiated. So use robust and credible, up-to-date current evidence to back up your claims. They must be factual and tested against scientific or other evidence to support the claim being made. Now, I appreciate this is a lot of information to fit in a small space on a product or on some packaging. So consider using a QR code or a web page that's easily accessible for customers to find further information about your environmental claims. According to the CMA, if businesses follow these 6 principles, they are less likely to fall foul of the law. I'll pass you back to Iona for the next slide.
Okay, so Jane's told us the law and she's told us what we can do. What can't you do? So don't make a general claim about a part of your product. That sounds really obvious, but we see it all the time. And the classic example is 100% recyclable. So it's quite an easy claim to make, because if something can be recycled on the curbside, it's quite easy to say it is recyclable. But when you say 100%, you have to mean the whole of your product, every part of it, not the bulk of it, but actually it's got a small lid which isn't recyclable. So has to be about the whole of your product. Don't make a claim without the data to back it up. Again, it sounds really obvious, but we do have clients coming to us who ask us, oh, can I make this claim? And we say, well, can we see the data? And they show us the data, but the data doesn't actually substantiate what it is that they're saying. So make sure the two are linked. Make sure you've thought about what it is you're saying and what your message is, and that you do actually have the data to back it up. And I do appreciate this is difficult. Obviously, you have marketing teams who are really keen to make big, bold claims, but making sure that that can be backed up with data is key. Don't make a claim that omits relevant information. So don't hide things or sweep them under the carpet, because they will get found out. Don't suggest that your claim is universally accepted unless it actually is. So if there is a divergence of opinion, be that scientific or popular opinion, then you can't suggest that one school of thought is the only way. Don't imply that your product has been changed to be better for the environment if actually it wasn't bad for the environment in the first place? Again, sounds really obvious, but it could be tempting if you've got a product that actually you think, you know what, my product isn't bad for the environment. If you somehow imply in your marketing that you've improved it in some way and that makes it better for the environment, that's as bad as getting it wrong and saying that it is good for the environment when it isn't. So again, it's all about being clear and being transparent. And similarly, you know, don't do things like highlight the absence of an environmentally damaging ingredient if in fact your type of product and your competitors' products never typically contain that ingredient anyway. Again, you're highlighting something that wasn't a problem before, so in doing so that could be misleading. So shall we move on? Actually, before we move on, maybe I'll talk quickly about what happens if you get it wrong, because I think that's important. If you get it wrong, the ASA can ban your ad. Now, whether you care about this will depend much on the risk tolerance of your company, because ultimately the ASA is not super quick. And by the time your claim gets investigated and they've made a decision one way or the other, chances are, if what your claim is in an advert, that advert will have moved on and not be being shown anymore. So you might not care about it being pulled. However, you might care about the PR story that comes out with it. So again, that really depends on the risk appetite for your company and how they like to be perceived in the press. When the ASA investigate something, you can seek to enter into a settlement with them. Typically that will involve your ad coming down anyway, but you might be able to avoid the PR story. And a few years ago, we might have said, oh, that's where it ends. But actually, the CMA is really hot on this at the moment. And the CMA's got much broader enforcement powers than the ASA does. So the CMA can, if it wants to, initiate proceedings. It can make you pay a fine or damages. I mean, there is a worst case scenario of criminal prosecution, which I think you'd have to be in a really bad place to get there, and I don't think that's a risk we should be staying up worrying about at night. But just to be aware that the CMA does take this seriously, and they have got much broader enforcement powers. And of course, if these two regulatory bodies start looking into your ad, there's a chance they might start digging into your supply chain and how things work. So just being conscious of that risk and making sure that the supply chain and everything else you should be doing is squeaky clean, because it would be terrible if they investigated an ad and uncovered a whole load of other problems, which then came out into the press. So, you know, there is a risk associated with this getting wrong. The regulators are getting increasing powers to enforce this. And of course, the PR risk is huge, because at the moment, nobody wants to be seen as getting this wrong. So moving on to talking about the grey area, I thought it might be helpful to talk about relative claims and absolute claims. It's the kind of thing that, unless you're a lawyer, you might not think of in those words. But an example of a relative claim is this product uses 33% less water than a competitor's product or our previous product. So you're comparing your current product to a previous product or to a competitor's product. So it's one product relative to another. An example of an absolute claim is this product is recyclable. This product is carbon neutral. So what's the difference between the two? Absolute claims, like environmentally friendly, must only be made if the advertiser can demonstrate that the product or service has no detrimental effect at all on the environment. So you might think actually that it might be easier to make a relative claim and say, well, look, it's one thing relative to another, and that's much easier to substantiate. And it is if you are really clear about the claim you're making. However, if you make a broad but relative claim, as we saw with the scooters, it can be, you can find yourself in a very difficult position. And this happened to Unilever recently. Now, I don't know if anyone from Unilever is on the call, and I don't mean to sort of call them out specifically, but I think it's worth talking through this particular example because it was high profile, and Unilever is a company that really tries to get it right, that really makes an effort to ensure that its supply chains are fair and that what they are doing is trying to make their products more sustainable and better for the environment. Obviously, they're a huge company and they've got tons of different brands, so it's not an easy task, but I feel like they're the kind of company that are trying. And they had a Persil ad which said that it was tough on stains, kinder to our planet. And the ASA picked them up on it and said, why is it kinder to our planet? And Unilever came back and said, we've got all the data to substantiate this. It's kinder to our planet for two reasons. One is that you can wash on a lower wash cycle and a lower temperature wash cycle, and you'll still get the stains out. So you're using less energy and you don't have to rewash. And secondly, the bottles contain at least 50% post-consumer recycled plastic. So actually our packaging is better for the environment as well. So do you know what? A year ago, I'd have said, fine, I feel like they've substantiated that claim. But now I would say that is not the case. And the ASA agreed. And the reason being that although there were two fairly convincing reasons, they said, actually, the claim you're making is kinder to our planet. That's an incredibly broad claim. You are not specifying kinder than what, kinder than your previous version, kinder than other products on the market, we don't know. And yes, although you have got these two elements, the ad showed other aspects of things that might be seen to be good for the planet, for example, collecting rubbish. And therefore it wasn't really clear from the ad what kinder to the planet related to. And so the ASA pulled the ad. And, you know, again, pulling the ad might not be a problem in itself, but for a company like Unilever that wants to be seen as doing the right thing, this is a hard message to swallow, that actually, whilst they are doing the right thing, what they need to do in their advertising is be really specific about the claims that they're making. So just have that in mind when you're making relative claims, a bit like the Tia scooters. Just make sure you're very clear relative as to what. And obviously, if you're making absolute claims, make sure you can make them. Is your product recyclable? That's probably fairly easy to substantiate. Is your product environmentally friendly? That's incredibly difficult to substantiate. What does that mean, and how are you going to go about showing that that's true? So moving on to a few common pitfalls to avoid. As Jane has already said, future-focused phrases, which I feel like used to be all the rage, are probably something now to avoid. So we have ambitions too, or by 2050, we'll be net zero, or we've been thinking about our environmental responsibility. You know, those aren't particularly helpful. Instead, tell us what it is you're doing, or what you will be doing in order to get yourself to those goals. And similarly, vague plans are not very helpful. Pledges, promises, plans for sustainability. Again, tell us what it is you're going to do. Buzzwords, obviously, marketers love buzzwords because they sell products, but think about what they actually mean. What message are you trying to get across? If you're saying carbon neutral or net zero, what do you mean? If you're saying sustainable or eco-friendly, what do you really mean? A few years ago, we had a trend for clean beauty and green products. You wouldn't get away with that now, because what is a green product? That doesn't really mean anything. Don't make assumptions. We all know that we shouldn't make assumptions, but the problem with assumptions is they're so easy to make, we don't realize we've made them. But as we saw at the beginning, you know, an assumption that vegan food is inherently better for the planet than meat-based food is all well and good, but you cannot rely on that to substantiate the claim you're making. So just have a think, what claim are you making? And have you made an assumption that you can't, that broadly speaking, what you're saying is right, but can you actually substantiate that? Don't make comparative claims that don't compare. When I write it down like that, I feel like that's blindingly obvious. But when you think about claims like kinder to the planet, you know, people are trying to say the right thing. But if you're going to make a comparative claim, make sure you're very clear what you're comparing it to. And finally, you need to substantiate. And we've already talked about that, but a failure to substantiate for the entire life cycle of a product and the entire supply chain of a product won't work. As I said earlier, the CMA are currently investigating whether ASOS, Boohoo and Asda have fallen foul of these rules. So ASOS have the responsible edit. What does responsible mean in that context? Boohoo have got ready for the future range. what future are they ready for? Does that imply that they are better for the environment? And Asda have got George for good. What's the good? So you can see how when I say, you know, substantiate your claims and don't make vague claims, it sounds really obvious, but people are doing that, and people are making these big, bold claims. And when you read them and really think about them, it's pretty unclear what they actually mean. And the CMA are coming down on that. So instead, tell your consumers what it is you're doing and what the impact is. So with that, let's move on to talk about a brand that has got it right. Costume, full disclosure, Costume are a client of ours, and Ed, who founded Costume, is, I think, on the line today. And when I thought about including this in this presentation, I actually hadn't known that Ed was going to be on the line. What he did was, I'll tell you first about Costume. So Costume are a startup that make made-to-order cycling apparel. And on them, they've got exclusive limited edition artist designs, and they use premium recycled materials. And quite a few months ago now, Ed posted on LinkedIn this post. And when I read it, I just thought, do you know what? That is an example of someone who's getting it right. So I wanted to talk through the post and just explain what I thought about it that was right. And I think there are a couple of rules that we can draw out of this that everyone can apply. So it says there's a lot of industry chatter this week about sustainable fashion, or the lack of it, with various reports damning the amount of greenwashing, even with some of the official reporting metrics. The simple reality is that recycled materials we use for our products still consume a huge amount of resources and energy. Our compostable packaging will stay intact long enough to cause problems for animals and marine life if not disposed of correctly. So what I liked first about this was he's being honest. There's no golden ticket here. Well, in fact, he goes on to say there simply is no golden ticket to sustainability. And this is why any fashion brand labeling themselves as such is at best being naive and at worst deceitful. So he's being really honest about the challenges. If you are selling products, ultimately you are putting more stuff into this world. So pretending that you are doing so in a way that is environmentally helpful is probably a lie. So let's be honest about the challenges that we've got to overcome. And let's think about what it is we can do to overcome them. So Ed goes on to say, at Costume, we believe that the best option currently available is to simply make less stuff. We do this through a combination of strictly limited editions sold by pre-order only. It's the opposite of fast fashion. So here he's going on to say, look, this is what I'm going to do differently. This might not be the solution for you and your business, and everyone's going to be different, but this is what I'm going to do differently, and this is how I'm going to do it. And then he goes on to say, ultimately, you as a consumer are in control. Research more, buy less, buy better. And he goes on to give us a link to his website where we can find out how he's doing it. So I read that and I just thought, oh, how helpful. Rather than some big, bold claim that I as a consumer really do want to make the right choices, but I don't know if I always am. Here, I think we can draw 3 rules out which can apply to any kind of marketing that you're doing. And I think the rules are, number 1, be honest. So Ed says we can't be 100% sustainable. Let's be honest about the challenges that we're facing. Number 2, tell us what the best option is for you. And that will be different for everyone, depending on the type of product that you're making, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But tell us what it is that you think you can do differently that's going to help. And number 3, tell us where we can get more information. And that is key because obviously in an advert or on packaging, you cannot get all of the information that you need to get on there. I appreciate that. And, you know, marketeers do want to make these big, bold claims. But if you can say in a very few words what it is you're doing, but then provide a link to somewhere that people can read in full, that's really helpful because it does mean that consumers can make better choices. And it also means that you are much less likely to fall foul of the green claims code that Jane was talking about earlier. So that is an example, I thought, of a brand that has got it really right. So on that note, I'm going to hand back to Jane, who's going to talk to us about certification marks, which is another way, I think, of quite easily getting it right.
Okay, so certification marks. First of all, I'm just going to distinguish certification marks from ordinary trademarks. So The function of an ordinary trademark is to distinguish goods and services of one undertaking from those of another. An ordinary trademark is essentially a badge of origin. Unlike ordinary trademarks, certification marks don't indicate the source of the goods or services. The owner is there to certify the characteristics of the goods or services and not to sell the goods or services themselves. So certification marks can assist consumers in their search for sustainable products because they indicate that a product or service has complied with certain standards. For example, that they are ethically manufactured or they have certain characteristics, for example, being organic, and that they've complied with rigorous regulations concerning use, testing, supervision, etc. There's hundreds of examples of certification trademarks, but I've selected just a few which you can see on the slide. So I'm just going to quickly run through them and say what each of them do. So the Fair Trade label is an independent guarantee that disadvantaged producers in the developing world are getting a better deal. The Rainforest Alliance frog certifies that products and services originate on or contain ingredients sourced from farms and forests that are managed according to rigorous environmental, social, and economic criteria. Going over to the right-hand side of the slide and the ASC fish logo, this is the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, which manages standards for responsible aquaculture. Products bearing this label come from fish farms that have met those standards. So from aquaculture to agriculture, we go to the middle, and the Demeter certification marks are a label for products from biodynamic agriculture. The products are produced by strictly controlled and contractually bound partners. Within the biodynamic agriculture, a farm is considered an individual, living and unique organism beyond a closed farm system. Directly beneath that, we have got the GOTS certification mark. Anyone on the call from the textiles industry will be hot on this one. To be GOTS certified, a product has to prove to be at least 70% organic, and the entire supply chain and manufacturing is monitored. There are strict controls on chemicals used, water and energy waste, as well as the treatment of workers. And then finally, bottom right, the red tractor logo certifies every step of the food journey from farm to pack. So if we move on to the next slide, this is how to use certification marks. So a certification mark can be used by anyone, so any person or entity who meets the criteria set out in the regulations provided by the owner of a certification mark. Having said that, certification marks can be limited to a specific group of users if the certification is in connection with a specialist service. To be able to use the certification mark, you need to apply to the owner of a certification mark. So you need to look to your sector or industry to find a certification mark that's relevant to your business. A lot of people have asked me, how do I find out about certification marks? It's a bit like, you know, like if you say, how do you know if someone's run a marathon? They will tell you. If you look into your industry and your sector, people within your sector and industry will be shouting about the relevant certification marks. Fees. So in respect to fees, it's common for the proprietor to charge a fee to generate income. The owner of the certification mark can't use the certification mark themselves. The owner is there to certify the goods, to certify the characteristics of the goods or services, not to sell the goods or services themselves. They could actually lose the certification mark if they do use it themselves. And then the last point there is B Corp. This is not a certification mark, but I mention it here because it's something to be aware of, because amongst other things, B Corp status verifies that a business is meeting high standards of social and environmental performance. We could do a whole webinar on certified B Corps, and I can explain a bit more at the end if there's time, but I just popped that on just so that just as something to be aware of. So moving to the next slide, please.
So I'll just run through our top tips that we think if you adhere to, you will be in a much better place for ensuring that the claims you made are not picked up by the CMA or the ASA, or indeed by consumers. So be honest. Obviously, we all want to be honest, but let's actually look at what we're doing and be honest about it, and be transparent. Don't hide anything, or don't make a claim that you think, oh, we might be able to get away with this. Really think about what you're claiming. I think that's the key one. I think it's really easy to come out with all these great buzzwords or really short and snappy and bold claims, but really think about what it is you're claiming and whether you can substantiate it, because you will need that data. And when I say substantiate it, I mean substantiate the entirety of the claim across the entirety of the product, across the entirety of the life cycle. And if that sounds like a big task, it probably is. You know, we do get asked by clients sometimes if we can provide data to substantiate claims. We're not in a position to be able to do that, but we have worked with other entities that are able to help gather that data for you. So there are companies out there who can help with that task. Be specific in your claim. Obviously, in an ideal world, claims will be super specific and say exactly what it is that they relate to, exactly when, give the exact numbers. And I appreciate that marketers don't want to do any of that. But if you, like Jane said, if you can't fit all the information on, do link to somewhere that you can fit the information on, so you can be clear what it is you're claiming. Obviously, what's on product or in the ad is going to be what's gospel, so make sure that is correct, but then do link through to give more information. Avoid buzzwords, as I've said. You know, it's really easy to say things are clean or things are green, but what does that really mean? And try not to make assumptions. Easier said than done sometimes, but you know, assumptions don't help anyone, because you could find yourself in a really sticky place. Don't forget about certification marks. Jane's just talked through them. If you're in an industry where certification marks are helpful, then think about whether you meet those criteria, and if you meet those criteria and can apply for the certification mark, then you can put it on your product, and that's really recognized by consumers and makes your life a lot easier, because it makes it very clear what it is you're claiming and how you're substantiating it. So in summary, I'd say tell your consumers exactly what it is you're doing and what the impact of it is. And if you can do these things, then you will be in a much better position to be able to substantiate those claims. I think that's everything that we wanted to cover today. I'd like to open the floor to any questions. I think we've already had one come through on the chat, so maybe I'll pick that one up. And whilst I'm doing that, if others have questions, please do put them in. So the first question was about how frequently claims need to be substantiated. So it's a really good question. And the answer is there is no answer. Obviously, it is not possible or practical to substantiate your claim. If you're making a big claim and you're putting it on a product that goes out into the market, it's not possible to substantiate that claim every day, every week, probably even every month. But if it's a claim that you're thinking is going to be out there for a long time, because some claims don't, some claims, you know, they're there for the life cycle of the ad, which is 6 weeks, fine, just substantiate it at the beginning, you're fine. But if you're going to put a claim on a product that's going to be out in the market, then have a think about how often it would be reasonable to substantiate it. If it's the kind of data that you think, actually, you know what, I've got the data, I'm substantiating the claim I made at the time, and I think that's fine, then you go with it. But actually, if you think things might change in 6 months, it's relative, say, to a consumer's product, their product may have moved on, then you do need to substantiate it. So it's slightly on a case-by-case basis, but you just think about what's reasonable in those circumstances. So we've got another question which says, you've covered the legal perspective, law and ethics converge. What would you see as an articulation of the ethical principle to apply to avoid greenwashing? I mean, my view on this, and Jane, chime in if you've got any other thoughts. My view is, I think what the CMA and ASA are trying to do actually converges with the ethical, in that they require you to not be misleading. And therefore, you've got to say what it is you're doing. You've got to be honest. You've got to be transparent. So as long as you're telling the truth, and then I think you are being ethical. You might not be perfect. You might not be doing it perfectly. There might be better ways to do it. But I think you are being ethical. I think when it becomes unethical is when people imply things in their packaging. For example, and this is an interesting example actually, which we haven't covered, using green packaging. As a consumer, you see green packaging, you think, oh, that must be the eco version. But if you've not said anywhere on your product that it is, you've not made an eco claim anywhere on your product, actually, that could just be any old thing. But there's no law against using green on your product. So I think that's possibly where it becomes a bit murky, is companies trying to look greener than they actually are. And I think that's really what the CMA and ASA are trying to battle against.
Yeah, I would agree. It's basically about don't be misleading and just substantiate and be honest and truthful. And if you're using logos on your packaging that imply that you're environmentally friendly, just take a step back and have someone have a fresh look at it with fresh eyes, and just say, you know, if you saw this, what would you think? You know, what impression am I giving off here? Yeah, just don't be misleading, I think, is the thing that runs through all of those claims, and just substantiate.
We've had another question in which says, do you see the CMA ASA developing more specific guidance on greenwashing issues in specific industries, e.g. those industries where this is expected to be a lot of change, innovation, activity as a result of the energy transition? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. I think the CMA and ASA will develop more specific guidance. This is such a hot topic, and they will try and do it by industry, because ultimately their goal is to help people, you know, help people market and sell things in a way that is better for everyone. And they appreciate that different industries are different. You know, for example, the energy industry, it's got a lot of specific regulations around it. Therefore, actually, the way they need to do things is slightly different. So I think we can expect to see that, yes. Another question's come through about the kite mark. So the kite mark we used to see a lot, and this person's asking, why don't we see that so much anymore? Is it a certification mark? Do you want to take that one, Jane?
Sure. So thanks for the question. The kite mark did used to be a certification mark in the UK, but for whatever reason, the certification mark actually lapsed. So the owners of the kite mark then applied for it as an ordinary trademark. As you might remember, I said earlier that the owners of a certification mark can't use their own mark. When the certification mark lapsed and they applied for an ordinary trademark, the UK Trademarks Registry refused it because it was deceptive. Because for years and years, everyone had known the kite mark as a certification mark, and it was certifying certain standards. And then when they went to reapply for it as a ordinary trademark, it was refused. So if you do think about taking up a certification mark, don't let it lapse. Basically, you've just got to keep it in force and maintain it and keep using it. And you definitely can't then apply for it as an ordinary trademark. I hope that answers the question.
I don't think we've got any other questions come in, so I think it's probably the right time to wrap up. On the final slide, I've put our contact details. Please do feel free to get in touch. We would be really happy to talk to anyone about this topic or about any other advertising and marketing questions you might have. We have recorded this session, and we will be making it available on our website. So if you have any colleagues who couldn't make it today, please feel free to direct them to that if they'd like to have a look at it. And it just leaves me to say thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We hope it was useful, and we hope to speak to you all soon.